Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third annual National Security Symposium at Vanderbilt University. I'm Jamie Hopkins from Naval ROTC Vanderbilt. I want to thank you all for being here. I particularly want to thank the faculty, the staff, and the students who've joined us today. General Martin, General Scholes, thank you for being here. Although, General Martin, I know you're kind of here to see the enemy as the Commandant of West Point, but we still love to have you in the audience. Admiral Brest, it's a pleasure to have you here as well. Other members of the armed forces, general officers, flag officers, thank you for joining us today. Citizens of Nashville, thanks for being here as well. In particular, welcome to the classes that end with 1 and 6. I think it's your year to be here, and thank you so much. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Mike Newton, who is uniquely qualified to introduce our guest speakers today. Not only is he a professor of law specializing in international law here at Vanderbilt University, he was also a professor at West Point prior to coming here, where he specialized in international and operational law. Before that, he was at the Judge Advocate General School in Charlottesville, Virginia. So, Mr. Newton, would you join us, please?
It really is a joy to be here, and I won't take much time, particularly in the presence of a fellow armor officer. It's a good thing. I've always believed, and particularly for the young folks that are about to take a commission one day, that one of the greatest natural resources that we have are the Americans who put on uniforms to go all around the world and serve our republic. They do it in times of war, they do it in times of peace, they exemplify selfless service, they exemplify dedication to duty, they exemplify the warrior ethos. You have one of those with you today. Perhaps, by some standards, the preeminent measure of that. General Richard Myers served as the 15th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You all know that. But he also served as the vice chair. He served in command levels, at all levels up. This is a man who has the warrior ethos in spades. He flew over 600 combat missions in Vietnam. Might have flown with my father, in fact. From Kansas City, but he's not in Kansas anymore. Lives in Washington with his wife, Mary Jo, of 46 years. But, I'm 46. No, 46, that's right. His time as chairman was marked, as you might know, by some of the gravest challenges that have faced our country. And truly, it takes a leader inside the Beltway and inside the halls of the Pentagon to manage the vast array of problems that came up during his tenure. Of course, in the post-9/11 era, I watched him from my platform at the State Department, and it was truly an impressive display. America watched him during congressional testimony and any number of other public encounters as he confronted the post-9/11 era. They planned the war in Iraq. They handled the Fort Hood massacres. You just think about the array of things. They handled the outreach to soldiers and airmen and Marines. They handled budgetary issues, an enormous range of leadership. As with many of our senior leaders, of course, he's a Renaissance man. I'm told, on fairly good authority, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, that there's a grand piano back there, and if we wheeled it out, you could play it quite credibly. This is a Renaissance man who in addition to his Kansas State degree, hailed from Auburn, all the normal military schooling, Air Command, Army War College, National Defense University, etc. And as you would expect, post-retirement, the career of leadership and selfless service doesn't stop. I could give you a very long list, which I won't take time to do, of the boards on which he serves, the way that he reaches out to people, the way that he reaches out to young Americans, in particular the Fisher House, a critical service that is provided by civilians to assist the military and their families. He would tell you that one of his proudest accomplishments and one of the things that he would like to be remembered for are 3 children and 5 grandchildren. And it's on that note that I promised Mary Jo that I would take just a few minutes to embarrass her slightly. Y'all may not know this, but when King Leonidas went off to Thermopylae, he judged the Spartans that would go with him, not by the character of the Spartan warriors, who were more or less fungible items. The Spartan ethos is the Spartan ethos. King Leonidas picked the warriors that would go off to Thermopylae by the character of their wives, because he knew that those widows would set the tone, that essentially the fate of Greece would rest upon the dignity and on the bearing and the professionalism and the courage and the strength of those women. I think Mary Jo would have fit in quite well with those women. She is a remarkable woman, also a product of Kansas State, a military spouse for more than 40 years, and anybody who served knows that that in and of itself is an amazing accomplishment, to serve with dignity and strength and courage. And it's fair to say that she served as much as he served, everywhere he went and everywhere she went. Today she is on the board of advisors of any number of organizations specifically focused on military families and on support to soldiers. I could give you some of them: the National Military Family Association, the Discovery Military Channel, the Executive Advisory Board for Tri-West Healthcare, which is a military health care provider. Importantly, she's on the board of trustees for the Fisher House, and I hope she talks to us about that a little bit. She was also instrumental in establishing programs to help families, so a program that helps fly families to the Fisher homes, which is a benefit not provided by the military. As with typical military spouses, she has the attitude, see the problem, solve the problem. So let me just give you a listing of the things she's currently involved with. Helping schools for street children in Afghanistan, a board member of Medicine, which is an organization that delivers medical equipment and medical services around the world. And my personal favorite, this sounds like a four-star command. You're going to think I made this up, but I didn't. She is currently serving in WIPAC. And you say, what is that? This is the Women's Initiative Policy Advisory Council with former First Lady Bush, again, focusing on helping military and spouses and families and service of soldiers. In recognition of her extensive volunteer service, Mary Jo was appointed to the President's Council on Service and Civic Cooperation. It's with great, great pleasure that I ask you to help me join in thanking General Myers and his wife Mary Jo for being with us, and let's show them that we're a more friendly audience than any congressional hearing.
Well, thank you, Professor Newton. Thank you, Mike, for a very kind introduction. I was trying to compare my introduction to the one he gave for Mary Jo, and I'll try to get my part out of the way real early here, and then Mary Jo can speak. But we have been a team for over 46 years, and in the military, like in any really important endeavor in life, teamwork really counts, and who your mate is in that time is equally important. Admiral Rest, thank you, Jerry, for inviting me to be part of this forum. First of all, just kind of set the stage. I'm, of course, as Mike said, I'm a retired four-star general. There are a lot of these cadets, midshipmen sitting out there that probably figure, gee, by the time you make it to four-star, you just sit around in your big fat you-know-what and don't get much done, and a lot of people waiting on you. And as Admiral Rest will testify to, there's actually a little truth to that. That's pretty much how it works. If I were still in uniform, probably 6 seats over here would be filled with my staff. I'd have my executive assistant, have my public affairs officer, I'd have the speechwriter, I'd have maybe a security person, and a couple others that would just be there to make sure that whatever I wanted, I was going to be provided. So today, it's pretty much me and Mary Jo and me. Part of this. There's no staff. And so at some point when you retire, I don't know when it happened to Admiral Brest, you kind of get your comeuppance when you figure out that, people aren't really interested in the fact you were whatever you thought you were before. Now you're just an American citizen, which, by the way, is a great title to have. You're just an American citizen. And in Eisenhower, they tell the story about his retirement, retired from the military. He's got his assistant there, and he hollers to his assistant and says, "Get in here. Something wrong with this phone. Listen to this phone, the racket." And the assistant comes in and says, "Sir, that's the dial tone." Apparently General Eisenhower didn't make a lot of his own phone calls when he was the Supreme Allied Commander. My comeuppance was a little different. So when we were still in service, we lived in a great house at Fort Myer, overlooked all of Washington, D.C., the best. As you know, the Army likes the high ground, so we had the high ground over all of D.C. It's probably the best residential property, and it belongs to the U.S. Army. And I got a house there. We have a house there. Problem is, it's 4 stories tall. It's large, And you can hide stuff that when you get ready to retire, you got to figure out what I'm going to do with all this stuff. And so this is my goodwill story. What you do with it is you take half of it to goodwill. So it was an October day, a lot like today, actually. Just a beautiful fall day. And I'm in my truck, and I got my stuff in there, and I'm going to the Goodwill. And I get to this big Goodwill complex in Arlington, Virginia. It's huge. And I look across the parking lot as I drive in, and there are the two trucks where you, if you've donated to Goodwill, you usually have a truck or two. And so there's a truck. There's no line, so I can get there, get my stuff dropped off, and get on with life. And the only problem was right across my path was a Goodwill truck with a guy in it, and blocking my path. And there was a fence on one end. I said I couldn't get by him. So I leaned out the window. I said, would you just back up a couple of feet so I can get by you and drop off my stuff? And without blinking an eye, he says, you're going the wrong way. Well, it's just the two of us in this whole big complex. So I looked behind me, and sure enough, on the blacktop behind me, there was an arrow pointing the other direction. In my defense, a faded arrow. But I missed the protocol. So I said one more time, I said, okay, I'm going the wrong way. I really apologize, but if you just back up 2 feet, I'll scoot by you, and then I'll come out the right way. He says one more time, you're going the wrong way. I said, whoa, they trained him well. So we had a little conversation about, would you please back up, that sort of stuff. Finally, begrudgingly, with a look of disgust on his face, disgust for me, he backs up 2 feet. I go by him and drop off my stuff. And on the way home, I'm thinking, wow, that was interesting. I've been retired a couple of weeks. What would have been like 2 weeks prior? What have I been doing on a day like today, around 11 o'clock in the morning? Well, you could be meeting with the President of the United States. You could be meeting with the Secretary of Defense or all the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What was I doing 2 weeks after retirement? I'm using 40 years of tact and diplomacy trying to get this truck driver to back up 2 feet. And that's when I figured, okay, I must really be retired now, and nobody cares. And it's, we all get that at some point when you retire, when you think you're a little bit bigger than you probably are, you get brought right back down to the level you deserve to be at. What I'd like to talk about, I'm going to talk about some current security challenges that I think our nation faces. And then I'm going to stop. Mary Jo's going to make her remarks, and then we're going to open it up to questions and answers. And hopefully, we'll do this in the kind of time that we leave a lot of time for questions and answers. And as far as I'm concerned, as far as Mary Jo is concerned, any questions that you want to fire our way are fine. I don't think there's any way you can embarrass me. You might embarrass her, but you can't not embarrass me with whatever question you want to ask. So if you've been thinking of one for a long time, then fire away, and we'll try to do our best to handle it. Security challenges today aren't always on the front page, although right now we're reminded, as Gaddafi met his fate in Libya, a little bit more about the security situation. But I'm going to talk about three, I think, security challenges we have as a country, and they're very disparate. One's in Asia Pacific, one's in the Middle East, and one's global, that don't always get a lot of headlines, and could be the kind of issues that, if left unattended and left with not a lot of intellectual rigor and thought going into the process of devising strategies for them, could be really disastrous for our well-being. The first one I'd like to talk about Iran. What do we know about Iran? Well, we know it's a state sponsor of terrorism through Hezbollah. And oh, by the way, if you didn't know, Hezbollah is considered the A team of terrorism. Al-Qaeda is B or C level. Hezbollah is very well organized, has killed Americans before, very dangerous organization, has a global presence. What else do we know about Iran? They proliferate weapons, and we saw that in Iraq. We had absolute proof that some of the shaped charges and things that were being used by the insurgents in Iraq came from Iran. We also know that they don't believe in the existence of the state of Israel, which makes any kind of peace in that region tenuous at best. And finally, we know that they're pursuing nuclear weapons capability. We don't know if they're going to do it yet, but we know they're marching along that path. So at some point, they could have a nuclear weapon. What's the U.S. policy? Our president has said, the current president has said, President Obama, that we will prevent Iranians from developing a nuclear weapon. We will prevent the Iranians from developing a nuclear weapons capability, I think was the exact quote, or close to it. So that's our policy. So what's our leverage? What leverage do we in the United States have? What leverage does the international community have to deal with this? And the leverage is not very high. As you know, in the last several years, the UN has been seized by this matter, and there are several UN Security Council resolutions that have imposed varying levels of sanctions on the Iranian people. The sanctions are doing exactly as they were supposed to do. They're making the Iranian economy, they're putting the Iranian economy in great distress. So if you have any Iranian friends, you probably know that as they talk to their relatives back in country. It's not a pretty sight. They have, despite the fact they have a lot of energy and they export a lot of energy, they have long gas lines and on it goes. They have some real economic problems because of the sanctions. But as a friend of mine in India said about a year ago, he said, after he did a business deal with Iran, he said, remember, Iran is a Shia nation, and the Shia pride themselves on the ability to withstand pain. So we're putting a lot of pain on Iran, but so far it hasn't yielded any sort of a commitment on their part to come to some sort of negotiating table where we can talk about their desire to have a nuclear weapon. So I'm not sure I have a remedy for this. I'm not sure if I were still in uniform what I'd say to the President or the Secretary or the rest of the National Security Council, other than the fact that if we don't find some way, some piece of leverage to start dealing with Iran in a reasonable way, that we could be left with only one option, and that could be a military option. My personal view, that would be a shame if it came to that point, and the military option were the only one to use, because it would not be an option that would be free from lots of consequences. The first of which would be great unrest in the Middle East, certainly from a lot of nations that would see that kind of intervention as probably another example of the U.S. trying to dictate to the Muslim world. So that would make our welcome there and probably impact our troops that we have still stationed in the region. There would be retribution to some degree. There would also be this whole notion of the Sunni states, the Gulf states, starting with Saudi Arabia and working on down the other side of the Persian Gulf. They would not be content to have an Iran with a nuclear weapon. They feel like they would have to have nuclear weapons as well. So you have to just think to yourself, is the world better off without a nuclear-armed Persian Gulf state sort of situation, or are we better off not having nuclear weapons in the neighborhood? And I think the latter is the case. And the other consequence of Iran developing a nuclear weapon would be the proliferation angle. There is a professor at Harvard, I think his name is Steve Rosen, who has written about this, who talks about the fact that every country that has developed a nuclear weapon has proliferated the technology. In the U.S.'s case, it was two friends, but has proliferated the technology. So if Iran wound up with a nuclear capability, the fact that they would proliferate that and the fact that they already support terrorism, you could see how maybe not a weapon, but maybe fissile material, maybe something nuclear could be given to terrorists that would then be used against us or against our friends and allies. I think it's a very real danger where we're trying to find out where our leverage is, and it's not apparent to me that we have a great deal of leverage, and it's a delicate problem. As you know, any support for any unrest, any folks that are trying to go across against the leadership in Tehran is a two-edged sword. Can work against us, can work for us, and so you have to be very careful how you do all this. But to me, that is the one we don't read about in the newspapers a lot, but it's one that push could come to shove. And oh, by the way, I mean, lest you think the military option might be preferable. Now this is without knowing any war plans or any intelligence, or trying not to remember any of the intelligence on the situation, but a strike, let's say an airstrike, something surgical, something where you didn't commit a lot of troops, whatever, you have to kind of doubt how effective that would be long term. It may have a short-term impact, but it might not have a long-term impact. So you just stir up a lot of people, and they continue doing what they were doing in the first place. I don't think you can ever assure yourself that a military strike would be the end of Iranian desire for a nuclear capability. So that's challenge number one. Let's go across the other side of the world, or pretty far around the world, to China. I have a different view of China than a lot of my compatriots when I was in uniform, probably even today. What do we know about China? Rising economic power. A power that would like to have a military that's commensurate with their economic power. And their military has been, just a decade ago, their military was third rate. And they have built it up over time, devoted a lot of resources to it today, where it's becoming a fairly decent military, particularly in certain pockets. They're still way behind in their naval forces, and they will be developing those, and we've seen that. We've seen the fact they want to develop an aircraft carrier, and they're in the process of doing that. But they're a long way, actually, from achieving, the kind of military power that would go along with their economic power. They're an absolute indispensable business partner. I'm on a couple of public company boards that relies on China for the economic progress in these various countries. The John Deere board that I'm on, we had our summer board meeting was in May, and early June was in Beijing, and we traveled around China. Is it difficult for business to do, or for businesses to conduct business in China? Yes, it is. Is it absolutely indispensable, indisputable that we need to be there? Yes, it is. And do they try to steal your secrets and your secret sauce on your products? Yes, they do. We went to a harvester plant up in the large province, Heilongjiang province up north near the Russian border, where they have their large agriculture operations, and John Deere manufactures harvesters up there. Right next door to the John Deere plant was the former joint venture partner that we started with in China, and they make harvesters too. And they had one parked in front of their building as we drove by it. Guess what it looked like? It looked just like a John Deere harvester, to include the green and gold on the wheels. I mean, it looked just exactly like a John Deere harvester. The problem was, I said, is that as good as the stuff we're making over? He said, no, it's not, because they don't have the competence yet to manufacture this to the tolerances that makes it as efficient as our harvester. They'll catch up over time, and that's part of the price you pay when you're there. You know that's going to be part of the deal. But an economic partner they are, and they're important. I personally see little chance of any direct military conflict with China unless it were over Taiwan. And I think as every year goes by, that becomes less and less of a threat. What it would take for China to threaten Taiwan militarily again, I think, would be Taiwanese leadership that talks very aggressively about becoming independent. The likely outcome, in my view, for Taiwan is that left to its own devices, it'll eventually become a Hong Kong-like, maybe even with more autonomy than Hong Kong, like piece of China in the end, because they're economically tied, they're culturally tied, they're family tied, and it's just, I mean, it's inconceivable that at some point that this won't become part of China in a way that would be acceptable to the folks on Taiwan, and certainly acceptable to folks in China. Other than that, I don't see the potential for military conflict unless it's miscalculation. And where that might occur is China's desire to have kind of arrange the balance of power in Asia Pacific more in its favor. The United States is the country in Asia Pacific that has helped maintain the security and stability of that region since the end of World War II. And that's helped every country over there with great economic progress. If you look at the individual countries in Asia Pacific, particularly Southeast Asia, you will see economic progress that has never been experienced on this planet before. And I would submit that part of the reason for that is the fact that the United States military has been there with our navies, our air forces, and in Korea with our ground forces, and providing that stability that then encourages economic progress. The Chinese will want to challenge our preeminence in our in our posture over there, and they will do that over time. I think only through some miscalculation could it lead to conflict, and certainly not long-term conflict. One of the reasons I say that is, what's the most important thing for China? If you're the Chinese leader, you wake up every day, what are you thinking about? What you're thinking about is keeping that economic engine moving at warp speed so they can continue their modernization, moving people from the agricultural areas into the city, building a middle class. At the same time, they're dealing with 350 million people in poverty, larger than our population in poverty, that they have to deal with every day. Because those people in poverty for a long time didn't know it, but now they know it because there's a superhighway running by them, their hovel, and there's BMWs on that superhighway, and they see people living a different lifestyle than the one they're living, managing a little plot of land. So the Chinese leaders have a real worry that unrest with 1.3 billion people could be really hard to manage if you don't keep this economic engine stoked. Any kind of instability, any kind of incident in the region could lead to that sort of problem. And I think for that reason they would be cautious. One thing that I heard Dr. Henry Kissinger say this summer, we were chatting with him at a breakfast. In fact, one of your alums, Claude Jarman, was there and probably remembers this. When asked about China, he said, you know, one thing that's interesting, the new leadership that's about ready to take over in China, they have not experienced war. Therefore, the folks that have gone before have all been part of a wartime generation, or their parents were in the war, and they understood that. This generation coming up, they don't understand that. And he says, my guess is they're going to be a lot more aggressively in the diplomatic front. And of course, you know, diplomatic aggressiveness can lead to confrontation. So my personal solution, or my solution to the Chinese whole issue is just to continue engagement. I think under President Bush, we made many trips to China trying to build transparency, trying to build trust. My successor did that. Admiral Mullen did that. I'm sure General Dempsey will do that as well as the rest of the State Department. I mean, all the instruments of power will be brought to bear to try to continue to build a more trusting relationship and a transparent relationship. I will be there in January with a think tank that is considered what they call a Tier 2 sort of unofficial, non-governmental visit to do exactly that. And we'll take some officials who've been in government and some who might be in government after the next election, both parties, take them over there and talk about these issues with the Chinese, trying to build that trust and that transparency. The last issue is a global issue, and that's the one of violent extremism. Not a popular topic today, after all. Didn't we get Osama bin Laden, have been whacking Al-Qaeda right and left? Yes, we have. And so the Al-Qaeda are beat, and they're certainly down. I would say they're also certainly not out. The whole philosophy of violent extremism, jihad against the West, is alive and well with the minority groups, of course, in the Muslim world. And it's something I think is going to be with us potentially for a long time. As long as it's with us, it's a big danger. And here's why it's a danger. When you have an adversary that is willing to kill innocent men, women, and children, and perhaps themselves in furthering their aims, with absolutely no remorse, no conscience, this is a very dangerous adversary. Given the right tools, they can wreak havoc. We saw with 9/11, we saw how they used airplanes as missiles and put in the buildings and lost, 3,000 people. And I bet in this audience, even with the young people, you can probably remember where you were in 2001, what you were doing, and how that impacted your life. So now, fast forward, and I'm not a fearmonger, I'm just trying to tell you what I believe, after working this issue for a long time, is if you would put in the hands of violent extremists, as I prefer to talk about them, as they would use terror as a method, weapons of mass destruction, maybe nuclear material of some sort, they wouldn't hesitate to use it in London or Madrid or New York or Washington or, God forbid, Nashville. But I mean, this is the sort of thing they would do. And I think until we learn to deal with this on a more strategic level, that we're going to be in some kind of danger. We're much better off today than we were when I took office October 1st, 2001. But we're not going to be really safe until we deal with this at a more strategic level. What do I mean by that? I think we've overused the military instrument of power in the last 10 years on the so-called war on terror. And here's why I say that. I don't think there's a challenge that we face as a country, or a challenge any of our friends and allies face, that can be solved either by one country or by one instrument of power. And what do I mean by instrument of power? Generally, there are three instruments of power people always cite when you're talking strategy: the military instrument, the diplomatic political instrument, and the economic instrument. I would add a fourth, and that's the informational instrument. I think we're in a different age today, in the 21st century, and I think information is an instrument of power and can be just as powerful as the other three. We have, for lots of reasons, I think, overused the military instrument of power and not relied as heavily on the diplomatic, political, economic, and informational instrument of power. And it's probably, people say, what are you least proud about during your tenure as chairman? Well, lots of things I screwed up, but one of the things was not being able to convince the National Security Council that we've got to focus our instruments of national power better than we were doing. And until we do, then the military is going to bear the brunt of it. The military is going to be injured and die at disproportional levels compared to everybody else. And I further believe that when you use all instruments of national power, you don't say, okay, well, we're going to use the military to make something secure, and then we're going to use the other instruments of power, diplomacy and economic, to finish the job. I think they all have to run simultaneously. They cannot run in series. And not everybody agrees with me. I don't think Colin Powell would agree with that. But I believe they all need to go simultaneously. I would use Afghanistan as an example. How are we doing in Afghanistan? Security-wise, Murjil's going to talk more about this. I'll just talk about the security situation as an example. Security-wise, we're doing pretty well. Training up the Afghan National Army and police, going pretty well. What about the central government in Kabul? How's it doing? Not so well. What's one of the reasons it's not doing so well? Well, frankly, I don't think we've had, until recently, strong ambassadors in the country to bring the diplomatic and political instrument of power to bear. And so, if they were to do that, if you're going to have strong central government, good connectivity down to the Afghan National Army and police, you'd have a much higher degree of success, I believe, in the provinces than if you had this disconnect, which we have today, and a central government that is not seen by the provinces as providing much support. So that's what I mean by all instruments of national power. It has to be all of that working together in the economic piece, and Mary Jo will talk a little bit more about that, because there's even more than those instruments of power. There's some other power that she'll talk about that's probably equally as important. The last thing I'll leave you with, so I don't think we have a strategy that can harness all these instruments of power. And you say, well, why can't we do that? We put people on the moon. Why are we not doing this? In talking with the Chancellor today, I guess he does a seminar on the Federalist Papers. And one of the writers, James Madison, would be very proud, because you remember what James Madison was concerned about? He was concerned about a federal government that was too well organized. They could get themselves organized and be too powerful. And so in our Constitution, we've taken care of that. And so we have a central government at times that looks like it can't find, its fanny with both hands. He would be proud today, I think. He'd be very proud. And we should be, these are wise people. These are really smart people that have studied all of the systems. But when it comes to our national security, it'd be nice if we were a little bit better organized. And we have the authority to do so, I believe. But we still operate under the National Security Act of 1947. So guess what? We're perfectly organized for another World War II. Is that what we're facing today? Not exactly. Have people proposed lots of changes? Absolutely. Have we made any changes? Minor through the years, through the decades, to that National Security Act. So I don't think we have the strategy, I don't think we're organized, and I don't think we have anybody actually in charge, because I'll ask this audience. When I was chairman, I stood on the podium next to Secretary Rumsfeld. We did a press briefing almost every week for periods of time there. And I'll ask you, who was in charge of our operations in Iraq? Who was a senior civilian in charge of our operations in Iraq? Anybody? Just give me a name. Bremer's, that's good. That was after major combat. But overall, for the government, who'd the president look to say, okay, you're in charge? Well, you got the right answer. It's nobody. Some people say Rumsfeld, but then if you're in charge, you also have to have authority. So what authority does Secretary of Defense have over state or justice or treasury or commerce? All these agencies and departments that were integral to our work in Iraq. So we haven't figured out how to organize ourselves to put somebody in charge, bring all these instruments of national power to bear on a very crucial problem, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, or the broader problem I was talking about just a minute ago, violent extremism. I'm going to leave you there, and I'm going to ask Mary Jo to come up, and she will talk for a little bit, and then we'll open up the Q&A. So Mary Jo?
Well, first of all, it's a real privilege to be here, and I have to thank Professor Newton for that very generous introduction. I warned him against overpromising, though, and it reminds me of a story in Washington that talks about a person's title. The longer the title, the less important the position. So, you know, there's Secretary Panetta, Secretary Clinton, but there's principal, deputy, assistant, undersecretary for fill in the blank. So there may be a comparison between that and the length of the introduction.
Let me she's not going to tell this, but in Afghanistan one time, she was introduced in I guess, Pashtun or something to an audience. And then years later, a couple years later, the general officer that was accompanying her, we were on different itineraries, said, you know, Mary Jo, do you know how they introduced you in that one Afghan meeting over there in Kabul? I said, no, I don't have any idea. It was in Pashtun, I didn't know. They introduced you as Mrs. #1 Warlord of the World. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mrs. #1 Warlord of the World.
Believe me, I haven't forgotten it, and I'm glad he hasn't either. Well, it's really special to be able to come here today and share a little bit about some of the things I'm committed to, some of the that are near and dear to my heart. And I'll tell you right off that my grandchildren, I've decided to omit them from the comments today, but you feel free to ask about them afterwards. But today I'd like to talk to you about our commitment to military families and to Afghanistan. As Michael said, my husband served for more than 40 years, and yes, I agree, spouses also serve. And so we have continued to try to stay connected with the military families through some of the organizations that we're affiliated with. And one of those is the USO, of which I will say my husband is chairman of their board. And some of the things I'm talking to you about, I think they all have a tie to Nashville or to at least to your area. And with the USO, we can certainly say that and say a big thank you to the city for the entertainers that go on the USO trips. And I think it's the Nashville entertainers that are first to put their hands up and go into harm's way, and they do. They go to those forward deployed bases and give of their time on a very rigorous schedule to entertain our troops, and for that we are most appreciative. But the USO today is not Bob Hope's USO. The entertaining part of it is only about 20% of what they do. And that could be another speech to go into that. But one of the things they do is spend quite a bit of money buying satellite access so that the deployed troops in remote locations can stay connected, because that's what's important to the troops, and they listen to what they want. Another huge campaign that they're involved in is building 2 wounded warrior centers for families at the new Walter Reed at Bethesda, as well as at Fort Belvoir, which is located in Virginia right outside the D.C. area. But these are going to be really state-of-the-art centers with the latest in connectivity and a one-stop shop and everything. So it's not just the military member that the USO is committed to now, it's the family as well. And they've reached out to partner with many other organizations so that everybody can scale up what they do. makes us very proud. The second organization that I'm going to mention today is something Michael mentioned too, is the Fisher House Foundation. And they build comfort homes on military base, near military hospitals and Veterans Administration hospitals. How many have heard of the Fisher House Foundation? Oh, great. Well, I don't have to do much education with this audience. It was started by a family the first house was opened 20 years ago. They now have 55 homes. And it was started by the Fisher family to honor the sacrifices that our military makes and to serve them in a humanitarian way. And so they serve families that have somebody ill in the hospital. They can serve them when they have an outpatient visiting that hospital. And they are much more than a hotel, and I'll read you a couple stories. But first, as many of you know, Nashville, Tennessee, and specifically Murfreesboro, is going to be getting a Fisher home, the first one in Tennessee. And there's a great board of directors that's helping to chair that whole operation. And I'd like to ask Andrea Lawrence to stand up and say hello. She's the president of the board of Fisher House here in Tennessee. Thank you. And she shared exciting news with me right before we came on today that they signed a memorandum of agreement with the Fisher House Foundation. And they're about halfway through with the fundraising and hope to break ground next spring. But I'd like to I think rather than my telling you any more about them, I'd like to read just a couple letters of thanks from people who have had personal experience with homes. The first one is from a little 13-year-old girl. She says, "Your house is just like a dream, and we did not expect that. Everything is here. My mother calls it an ideal house. It even has a dishwasher, but my mother does not want to touch it, saying that is for lazy people. I'm afraid of my operation, but living in your house I can dream and forget my worries with my bad heart." Another one is from their recent magazine, from a Air Force tech sergeant who was wounded in in Afghanistan, near Bagram. He was on a mission to rescue a downed Army helicopter, and they took several rounds through the floor of his plane. And after several surgeries, he's reached the Fisher House in California. And he says it's a beacon of hope. It's not a feeling of sympathy, it's empathy. And they can relate because they're vets and we all are going through the same situation. And then because his family lives in Okinawa, if they didn't have the Fisher House, and I did not mention a very significant thing, the Fisher Houses are free of charge. Free. I'm sorry. I get emotional talking about this. I thought I wasn't going to read the stories that would make me cry, but anyway, his family lives in Okinawa, and without the Fisher House there, they would have to return. He said, if my family had to leave, the mental stress alone would have broken my spirit and caused me to go into a state of depression and hampered my recovery. My wife and kids are the motivation all the time. Well, I didn't succeed. I didn't think I'd have to bring out the tissue. One more from a volunteer. She said, I offered a ride to a family who were guests at the Fort Lewis Fisher House. Although I had baked or cooked meals and dropped them off at the Fisher House before, I had never gone inside until tonight. I was amazed at the reception this family received from others in the house. Someone looking from the outside would think they were related with all the hugging and smiles and compassion. It was an experience of a lifetime. What Fisher House has created in this community is beyond words. This house tonight was filled with love, hope, and peace beyond anything I have seen in my 40-plus years. Thank you for being there. So you can see they're much more than a hotel. The people that stay there develop a real bond and provide a real consolation for each other. So, Andrea, best of luck to you and your team for continuing with that fundraising and the groundbreaking. We wish you all the best with that. The other subject I'd like to talk about today is Afghanistan. And just as Fisher House celebrated its 20th anniversary, we're not celebrating, but Afghanistan, as you know, it's a significant decade too, with 10 years since the war there began. And I think our country has reached war fatigue. I mean, everywhere you go, people are depressed about the negative stories that come out of there and want to bring our troops home. Raise your hand if you've heard a good news story about Afghanistan lately. Well, either you're asleep or you haven't heard any. I'll assume it's the latter. But I'm going to share a few good news stories with you today. There's certainly conflicting images of Afghanistan, and we're familiar with the bad ones. And I'll tell you, we'll spell some of those out to show the extreme contrast between the country. I mean, it's a place where I think every Afghan knows someone who has lost a loved one. I mean, they've had conflict from the Russian invasion to civil war to the Taliban. It's a country where shoes are left at the entrance, but guns are not. It's a country where children learn to count by 1 Kalashnikov, 2 grenades, 3 rifles, 4 bullets. It's a country where 1 out of 4 children dies before the age of 5. Where the life expectancy is 46. What did I do? Where the life expectancy is 46 years. And this was a story from a medical clinic. They brought in the mothers-in-law to find out about why the infant mortality rate was so high. And they asked them, what do you do when a baby has diarrhea? And the answer was, well, you take away the liquids. So you can see what we're starting with there. But let me take you back a few years before that, before the Russian invasion, and it's a different vision. You can read in guidebooks that Afghanistan was a backpacker's paradise. It's known for its generosity. They would deprive their own family members so that they could provide a guest with what they needed. There were tall, modern buildings next to bustling and busy bazaars. There were professional women working in those buildings who wore fairly short skirts in the 70s. Their schools were co-ed. There was modern music being played. They were listening to the Beatles. They were watching movies. It was a land where beauty was appreciated. If you spent an hour looking at a flower or reading poetry, that was not considered time wasted. But unfortunately, they have another legacy now, and that's what has to be faced. On one of my first visits there, I went to an orphanage, and there's a saying that says you can leave Afghanistan, but it doesn't leave you. And at this orphanage, most of the children were out with other family members because it was a holiday. But there was one little boy there in quite a large room, pretty much of an empty room with just a small toy he was playing with. And I had gone to the orphanage to deliver some school supplies. And he thanked me for that, and then through a translator, he said, and looked up with those just amazing eyes and said, please don't forget us. Of course, I wanted to sweep him up and take him away, but not being able to do that, I've tried not to forget the children of Afghanistan. Another experience was visiting a school called Ashiana, which means the nest. And this school was started by a man named Engineer Yusuf in the mid-90s when, during the war times, he saw children outside his own home just sitting in the streets that had no place to go. He started bringing them in small groups at a time, feeding them, giving them some basic literacy skills, and that has grown into now an organization that teaches 7,000 street children throughout Afghanistan today. And I was a founding member of a foundation that just helps support what this man does. He is amazing at how resourceful he is to meet the needs of whatever he sees. And they basically do literacy, vocational skills, and give the children a hot meal every day. And we've been able to get him a new building in Kabul, and now we're working on a health clinic for him. But he is one of the 3 people I want to tell you about today. So in some ways this is more like storytelling, but 3 people who are making a real difference in Afghanistan and can give us some sort of hope for the future. The other two are women. And I think too often women in war especially they're seen as victims. But there's so many Afghan women that are anything but victims in spite of what they've been through. And you've all read about the suppression of women where they couldn't leave their homes without a male escort. There were stonings. They could not laugh out loud. They couldn't wear shoes where the Taliban could hear the heels clicking. Just unbelievable stories of suppression. But the women have shown amazing resilience throughout all of that. One story is about women going out to vote in one of their early elections. And they went in a group and they were all dressed in mourning clothes that would be in preparation for their own death. And when somebody, asked them as to why that was the case, why they were dressed like that to go vote in an election, they reminded them that just a few weeks prior, a busload of people had been killed by the Taliban for just going to register to vote. But it shows you how much they cared about that precious right that we don't even reach 50% of the people in our country voting. Another woman named Raj is a very dynamic woman building a school. And she was building a school for girls. And the village elders came over to lecture her that she shouldn't be building a school for girls. You should be building a school for boys. Men are the future of Afghanistan. And she replies and says, well, women have the eyes, and they are the ones that will see our country to a different place. And they proceeded. The one man stepped forward and said, well, if you proceed with this school, I will lie down in front of the bulldozer and prevent you from your continuing. And she said, well, then we will run over you, and we will bury you on the grounds of this school, and we will build a monument to you and ask people to contribute their money to the man who gave his life to this school. So that's the kind of spirit that we want to see. Another inspirational story of two women I met this summer. It's actually two women. One is the mother who was widowed, and that's another huge problem in Afghanistan with the many widows that have really no source of way to earn a living. But she started a carpentry business in a very male-dominated society. She has 90 people working for her. And her daughter became her accountant. And I guess that was known in the community because there were three men then who were shoemakers and came to the daughter to ask her if she would help them start their business of making shoes. And so she has done that. And now the business is, and the daughter really is heading up the business. The three men who came to her now work for her. She has 12 other employees, and she is 20 years of age. And she has accomplished that in a society only 10 years removed from the Taliban. So the issue of women, I know, is a huge issue, and I'm standing between you and some great questions I know you'll come up with. But Hillary Clinton said, I believe that the rights of women and girls is the unfinished business of the 21st century. A democracy can't function if women are left out of the decision-making process. And a democracy is much more likely to be prosperous and peaceful if half of its population is not marginalized. And that's the point. It's not only the right thing to do, it's the economically right thing to do, too. So I've told you about people in Afghanistan making a difference, but there are people right here making a difference to the same causes I care about. And I mentioned Andrea Lortz, but there are two other people, Jan and John Bradley, who started an Afghan foundation, and they would be here today, but they are in Afghanistan, building schools for girls, helping to deliver some of the tons, probably, of food that they had shipped. John's brother is here. Leonard, is he in the audience? Oh, great. Well, John served in the Air Force, retired as a lieutenant general, and was very involved in humanitarian deliveries while on active duty, and then they came back to their hometown in Nashville and started the Lamia Foundation, which is named for a little girl whom John met in Afghanistan who was wearing no shoes in December and just was so touched by the need. These two people are angels walking among you, I tell you. So I'd like to close there, but if Afghanistan can be saved, I think it's through the children, through giving them the gift of education. That's a gift that can't be taken away. And they will be the future. And I think that's what we have to keep the faith in. So, as I said, just as my interests have merged with many of you in this area, it's not atypical. I think you could find people all across this amazing country that would have that similar dedication and commitment to what's going on around them and around the world. And our goodwill and our spirit of generosity, I don't think will be forgotten. But that too, this could be another speech, but I think our spirit of generosity, volunteerism, humanitarianism is unique. And I use that unique in the sense of really one of a kind. So never, I'll end with this quote. Some people say it's Margaret Mead, but that's disputed, but the important thing is the words. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
Well, first I have to correct something that the General said. You are not allowed to ask just any question. In fact, you can only ask those questions which have to do with the Tennessee-Alabama football game. You may not know the essence there.
I'm not sure I do know the essence.
It's great to have my old neighbors here bringing you this program. It's great to be part of the ROTC unit at Vanderbilt and to have watched it grow and to watch the things that it's doing, even to the benefit of Fisher House. It's a pleasure to have Dick and Mary Jo here. They were wonderful neighbors, although I will have to say in the late 70s he was a major and I was a Navy captain, so there's been a bit of a rank inversion there as well. But we will now open up the floor to your questions and be happy to go any way you'd like to take them. Yes, sir. Is that Jim Auer? There is at least, well, there are microphones on both the port and the starboard side, so fire away.
Thank you. I have a professional question for General Myers and a personal one for either one of you. The professional one is, General, I think you were once commander of U.S. forces in Japan.
Correct.
And I wonder if you would speak to people here who may be Navy and Marine Corps, particularly officers, in the future as to whether service in Japan is enhancing to their career. My personal question is about Afghanistan. I have a son in the Marine Corps who's on his second deployment there, and I think it was announced today that the president announced that we would be out of Iraq by the end of this year. And there are some people who seem to be fairly intelligent who say we ought to be out of Afghanistan also. And it seems to me, for everything that your wife just said and stories I've heard from my son, that would be a tragic mistake for us to get out of Afghanistan, but I wonder if you'd comment on that, please.
Okay, I'll take the first part, and you can help me on the Japanese part. You know, part of what I talked about China and our forward deployed presence and how important that's been to security and stability in the Asia-Pacific region, and then therefore economic progress. I mean, there can't be more satisfaction, I think, if you're part of the 7th Fleet, part of the Marines on Okinawa that are ready to go. If it's Korea, that they have to go, or the mere presence there that lends to the security and stability of the region. I think I can't imagine that it would be anything but a very fulfilling assignment. And particularly when you go to Japan, which is a culture, and I don't know if we have any folks in here from Japan, but it's just so different than our culture, and it's always, if nothing else, interesting to be in that new culture and trying to learn it and my personal experience as the commander of U.S. Forces Japan, I was treated like the second coming of MacArthur. I mean, you know, he spent a lot of time in Japan, and they revered General MacArthur. And so whoever was the commander of U.S. Forces, you were given a stature way above what you deserved or your rank or anything else. And it was, I told Mary Jill on the way to Narita Airport as we were leaving, and I was leaving as a Lieutenant General 3-star, and I said, why don't we call it quits? Let's retire. I'm not going to get promoted beyond 3 stars. This is the most fulfilling assignment we've ever had in our life. Why don't we just quit and we'll do something else? Part of that was to give her an out. We've been doing this for a long time, and I thought maybe she said, you know, you're right, we ought to quit. But she said, no, there's more adventure out there, and she was more right than she knew at the time. There was a lot more adventure. But I think it's an important, fulfilling assignment. And oh, by the way, the Japanese pay for most of our facilities, a lot of our morale, welfare, and recreational capability over there. So it's an expensive place to live, but it's not expensive to you as a military member over there. A lot of stuff is, you get colas, you get all kinds of good deals. And so if you want to just see Asia Pacific, if you want to snow ski in some of the best snow skiing in the world, if you want to do all that dive around Okinawa, if you want to do all that, Japan's the place to be. So I think for all myriad of reasons, I think that's a reasonable thing. Anything to add on Japan? Get up to your mic.
I just can't do anything but second that. I mean, still 15 years later, the ties with the friends we had there, and one in the audience today, Chaplain Mike Wheelerton, stand up.
That's right. Chaplain knows a lot about...
A great friend that we haven't seen for a number of years, but those ties from Japan still remain strong, and he's teaching at Liberty University here in Nashville. But I just echo that, and I think the reception from the Japanese people.
Yeah.
I think that's the music.
On the Afghanistan piece, obviously a lot of controversy, and I think first principles. I personally believe that an Afghanistan left in chaos is not good for our security, certainly not good for regional security, not good for the people of Afghanistan. Lots of reasons you don't want to do that. But to make that case, there are only a few people that can make that case, and I think the President of the United States needs to make that case. President Obama made that case when he did his troop surge. If you read what he said at West Point, that was pretty encouraging. We'll have to see how this plays out over time. But Afghanistan is going to be a project that's going to take, I think, generations. I don't think it's always going to take Marines dismounted, getting the stuff blown out of them in Marjah to get that done. But there will be some more need for security. But there's also a lot of need to help coach Karzai on how to be a better leader, to coach, make sure he picks the right people to surround him with, to work the corruption pieces. I mean, we have people that are devoted to doing that, very smart, intelligent people that risk their lives every day when they go to work to do all that. And I don't think we ought to give it up. That's my personal opinion. Again, Dr. Kissinger in the same talk where he talked about China, he said, you know, this really needs to be internationalized in a more serious way, because this is an international problem. This is not a U.S. problem, not a NATO problem. It's an international problem with Afghanistan. And then you can't talk about success in Afghanistan without talking about what's happening in Pakistan and how they're going to either cooperate or not cooperate. That's a whole other topic, and I'm not going to address it now unless somebody has specific questions, although I think it was significant. Today you read in the paper that our Secretary of State, our Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Director of the CIA all went to Pakistan together to deliver some pretty tough messages. Now is the time, Pakistan, to sever your ties with any terrorist groups you think are important to your well-being, and to start working on the Haqqani network in particular, but other safe havens for Taliban and so forth that are disrupting government inside Afghanistan. So it looks like the U.S. government is doing some very serious thinking on that, because you can't have stability in Afghanistan without Pakistan helping. It's just not going to work. And thank you for your son's service over there. That's not a trivial deal. And the Marines, they all have. I mean, it's a tough place to fight. And the Marine, I assume your son is down south somewhere around Kandahar in that area, and that's some of the toughest fighting we've done up to date. It seems to be. We've gotten the edge there now in terms of security, but it's a tough fight. I just talked to a Marine going through some treatment for traumatic brain injury at McGuire VA Hospital in Richmond, Virginia, on Monday of this week, and how did you get injured and all that sort of stuff. And he was whole. He just had a couple of bomb blasts that went off way too close to him, and he was being treated, and was sharp as a tack, actually. Looked good to me. But he talked about some of the Marines are, thank God we have Marines, I guess is what I'd say about that.
Dick, you and Mary Jo don't know it, but Jim Maurer is a retired Navy captain and was a destroyer skipper, and I pronounced it Yokosuka last night, and Mary Jo says that's not the right way to pronounce it. But anyway, Yokosuka, whatever. Anyway, and then he had about 10 or 12 years in the State Department on the Japanese desk there, the Japanese relations desk, and he's now head of the Japanese liaison at the Vanderbilt Institute for Public Policy Service. So he's very much a Japanese advocate.
Let me take it one step further, not because I know that now, but just to put a exclamation point on this whole topic about Japan. I think it would be a huge policy failure if somehow the 7th Fleet and the Air Force as well, all the forces we have in Japan were brought home for some whatever reason. I think our ability to call ourselves a world power would be in great jeopardy at that point, and our ability to influence events in Asia Pacific. After all, we're an Asia Pacific nation as well, and we depend on those countries for our economic well-being. So we have a lot of interest to be there. So vital.
On the starboard bow.
Thank you so much for being here. It really is a pleasure to hear both of you speak. My name is Jesse Ehrenfeld. I'm a physician here on faculty at Vanderbilt University. I'm a critical care doc. I also have the pleasure of serving as a Naval Reserve officer in the Medical Corps. One of the challenges that I encountered has been, prior to the removal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, taking care of some of our servicemen who weren't able to navigate the issues about being with their domestic partners and same-sex spouses. Obviously, that's changed with Don't Ask, Don't Tell going away. However, there's still difficulties administratively. I think some of the issues have to do with the Defense of Marriage Act still being in place. I'm curious what Fisher House and USO and some of the organizations that you're involved in have been doing now that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is gone, and they're not restricted by the same policies that the government might be because of the Defense of Marriage Act.
That's a great question. I think I can speak for the USO piece of that. I don't think the USO cares one way or the other. I mean, we'll take care of family members. In fact, I know if a family member comes into a USO center needing whatever kind of help, whether it's family members, same-sex, or what, it doesn't matter. That will not be an issue. I'm not as clear about Fisher House. I assume they'd work through that because the Defense of Marriage Act, I was just at Fort Sill yesterday and talking to a bunch of soldiers, and I asked the brigade commanders, how's this Don't Ask, Don't Tell thing playing out? And they said, it's not a deal. I mean, it's not created a ripple. But they did bring that part up, and they said, we have not, the government hasn't figured out how to solve the Dauntless thing yet. So that'll have to play out. How that plays out in Fisher House, I do not know. They're private, but they're on government property, and that's a good question. And as soon as we finish this session, we'll email the director of Fisher House and say, how are we handling that? And have we thought about it? And we have a call here in about 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll bring it up on the call, unless you know, Mary Jo.
No, I don't specifically, but I think in further explanation, the foundation doesn't continue to run the homes once they're turned over to the military. So it would be up to the military to set that policy. It is a public-private partnership, and so the foundation is involved in building the homes, and then it's turned over to the military facility or to the Veterans Administration.
They're probably thinking they're caught up in, but it's a question that we need to raise. So we'll do that. That's very thoughtful. Thank you.
Yes. Well, good afternoon. We're honored to have you here at Vanderbilt. Happy homecoming to all of you. My name is Fabiani Duarte. I graduated with the class of 2010, so I'm green still. And I'm working for a nonprofit. I'm a member of AmeriCorps. Our nonprofit's called Still Serving Veterans. It's based in Huntsville, Alabama, my hometown. What we do is we connect veterans coming home from the war, that'll be coming home from Iraq and now Afghanistan, with jobs and educational opportunities. And what we found is that we found what this Pew Research poll that just came out last month says. There is a tremendous respect for our armed forces. There is an appreciation that exists there. But when it comes to suggesting a family member to serve or suggesting a loved one or someone that we know, the interest wanes and falls dramatically. And so one of my questions to you is, how do we connect our veterans, our heroes, with our students, our future, and not just students at the college level and not at just the high school level that might have ROTC as an option, but students in middle school and younger. You know, something that you mentioned, if we can save Afghanistan, it's through the children, through education. So how do we expose our young people, our young minds, to not just appreciate, but also consider the idea? I was just accepted to law school. I'm trying to decide between Tulane or Pepperdine. Maybe you can give me a good recommendation on Malibu or New Orleans. But what I seek to do is become a JAG officer because of the work that I do. But I know a lot of my colleagues my age don't have that same initiative. So I would like your thoughts on connecting young people with our veterans.
Well, I think let's go to even a bigger issue, and we'll get to, let's go to the strategic, well, I guess maybe they're both strategic in a way, but the one issue that a lot of people worry about, and Admiral Mike Mullen recently retired just in 30 September, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was very worried and talked about this a lot, of the military becoming disconnected from the American public. And he said, you know, we're a small military, 2.3 million if you count reservists and guards people, active duty, and the population that continues to grow. So we're smaller in proportion. We don't have conscription or a draft anymore. They're all volunteers. And so there is this worry that your military will become disconnected from the American public, which is, if you look at the military profession, one of the 4 touchstones, faithfulness to the Constitution and a couple others, one of the touchstones is the vital importance of having the trust of the American people, having the trust of the American people. And one of the things that helps you, I guess, is the American people, I think, trust our military. The Gallup polls that come out every year, the military is the most trusted institution. I mean, it has been this way for as long as I've been watching these polls, at least a decade, probably more. The most trusted institution in the United States is the military. And other institutions start down, and unfortunately, somewhere in there you find Congress, you know, kind of around the... And that's not a hit on Congress. I have a lot of respect for folks at public service and do all that, but that's just, you know, that's where we kind of hold them down here. But the military is held up here. So I think here's what I think one of the solutions is, and I told it to a group of soldiers. I challenged them yesterday. I had an auditorium full of soldiers, and I said, you know, we need to stay connected to the American public, and what you need to do is, you folks that have been to combat once, twice, or whatever, or maybe never, maybe you're so new you've never been, or maybe you've never had a chance to go, but avail yourself of opportunities to talk to Lions Clubs, Rotary Clubs, schools, where you can talk to people about your experiences in the military, what you did, why you thought it was important, what you liked, what you didn't like, all that, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly, but talk about that, because that, to me, is one of your obligations. And we have, in my view, wonderful men and women who've served and have done amazing things. I remember this young, probably a corporal, may have been a private, and he's in Walter Reed, and he had an RPG that went through the calf of his leg. He still had his leg, so I mean, it just took a lot of muscle with it, but he still had the calf of his leg, and he said that the thing that all the wounded say is, I want to get back to my unit. He was one that probably could make it back to his unit, but I said, well, he was like 21 years old. I said, what were you doing in Iraq? He was up north in Iraq, near Kirkuk. He says, well, I'm an artilleryman. I said, well, we don't need, this is after major combat, so we don't need much artillery support up there right now, so what are you really doing? He says, well, I'm helping the town council of Kirkuk develop. I said, what do you know about developing town councils? He says, I remember my civics from high school. I got that going for me. And in any case, I know a lot more about it than they do. And I mean, to have people like that go back to their high schools and classrooms and talk, so it's not just, I mean, I think our military does so much more. I mean, we are a very lethal force. We're the most lethal force on the planet. We know we can do that, but we do so much more. Most of what we do is not the lethal part, and that's a good example. And that's been true in Afghanistan, and I'm sure your son's going to be involved in lots of other. I mean, the first thing this Marine told me that was being treated for TBI, where he got blown up, the first thing he did was go meet with the village elders. He had to go around to each village and meet with the village elders, drink very sweet tea, and try to build rapport. He also thinks one of them turned him in and said, here's that guy, we can get him if he, you know, here's his, anyway, so that resulted in the blast that injured him. But I think that's what, I think it's trying to get a realization by our senior military leaders that you can't make them, but ask them, you know, go back to your high schools, go back to your hometowns, talk. There is a program to do that. We need to do that probably in a much more aggressive way. That'd be my solution.
Next question.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for the service both of you provided. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks.
I'm a citizen trying to set up a rehab center with a special interest in the post 9/11 veterans that have come back. Now, the physical rehab is pretty straightforward, but I wanted to ask you what would be something important to know about the psychological and spiritual rehab that needs to happen both for the soldiers and their families, and any misconceptions the general public may have and how to work around that.
I think Mary Jo's going to, because we've both been, well, she knows a lot about this, I think.
First of all, thank you for what you're trying to do. And if you, one thing that comes to mind is that I work with a company that does, I work with the military-related events that they do, but I was just told recently, I said, there's so many organizations out there. And somebody had done the research and said, yes, there are about 90,000 organizations that have been formed to support the military. So if there's any other, I'd say go to some of these other organizations that are involved in that kind of work, because there are some real issues with traumatic brain injury, with PTSD, post-traumatic stress. And when they opened the new Center for Excellence at Bethesda that's focused on traumatic brain injury, I talked to some of the doctors that have been involved, civilian doctors that have been involved in brain research for decades, and they said we're still in the infancy stage. That's what's so sad, is that so little is known about brain injuries and really how to treat them. So there are a lot of experimental things going on, but there are a lot of organizations that will do retreats for families and for couples upon their return. I think those things are great too. I don't know whether that's getting to the specifics you want, but I think you're absolutely right in wanting to focus on those psychological issues.
I think there's a niche need here. That I think if you're active duty, you get one level of care for you and your families, and I think there's a greater recognition today than there was even when I retired 6 years ago about the need for including the family in the therapy that goes to working the psychological piece of this. I mean, we know about post-traumatic stress from Vietnam. We know we didn't handle it very well there, so we were a little ahead of that curve in this conflict, but we were way behind the traumatic brain injury, the concussions, and the lasting effects that can have in this because of the type of war this has turned out to be. But the group, where the niche is, I think, is with our Guard and Reserve, because a lot of them go back to their hometowns, their communities, and they don't have as readily accessible, psychological, mental health care that perhaps active duty does. And they're kind of, and I think in many cases, I'm probably over-exaggerating a little bit, but left to their own devices to figure out how to get this care. So that's a huge population. We have deployed our Guard and Reserve. I mean, unless somebody just joined yesterday, you probably have a hard time finding somebody who hasn't deployed. And I think dealing with that in those diverse communities, finding a way to reach them, make sure they, and it's all there. It's just harder for them to have the access. I mean, it's all potentially provided for. I don't know of any pitfalls. I know this is a need that I think if you're thinking about foundational work in this area, I think there is a huge need that could supplement what military medicine and what our TRICARE providers provide, and particularly in the Guard and Reserve.
I'd be glad to talk to you more during the reception too, if you have time.
Next question.
General, can you comment on the Stuxnet computer virus that has slowed the Iranian nuclear capability?
I really can't, actually.
A question on China's possible interference with our communication satellite capabilities?
The Chinese have been very active in the cyber arena and cyber warfare, and on the one hand trying to steal secrets so they can be better commercially, but also for military advantage. They have put a lot of effort in the cyberspace, cyber area, and they're really good at it. And if you read any of the congressional testimonies from the CIA, director of CIA, or any of the intelligence chiefs, or the military chiefs, Department of Defense, and so forth, they'll refer to attacks that we have going on daily. And some of them you don't find until after they've been underway for quite a period of time. So very sophisticated, and they know that we, as the United States Armed Forces, rely heavily on our ability to command and control our communications and so forth, and they are trying to take steps to maybe take that advantage away from us. And so I think a lot of what they do, the probings and so forth, they're trying to get ready for if there was ever a point of potential confrontation, they could take away that advantage that we have today. But it's a very serious threat. People, I didn't mention when I talked about China. I should have. I think it's a extremely serious threat. And I'm with an aerospace defense contractor on the board that just had an attack like that they didn't know about for I think a couple of weeks, and there was a lot of data extracted. It was all unclassified, but important, sensitive data that was extracted that would give, and it's presumed it came from China, and it gives them an advantage in the kind of stuff they were looking at with equipment, aerospace equipment. So it's a huge issue, obviously.
Next question.
General Myers, another question about China. You spoke about the relationship between China and Taiwan. Reminds me of a recent order that Taiwan placed with Lockheed Martin for something like 60 F-16s, and we canceled that. I believe we canceled that order in deference to China. So I was wondering if that's because the diplomatic headache is not worth the economic benefit.
Well, I mean, you got to be a little careful with your banker when you try to. You don't want to irritate your banker too much. That's a joke. But they are our banker, aren't they? I mean, that's the way life is. Here's my take on that. We have laws on our books that we are obligated to support Taiwan, and we've always used this idea of kind of military parity. Now, who in their right mind thinks we can sell them enough F-16s or ships or anything to give them parity with China? I mean, is that a realistic thing we could do as the United States? The answer is no. They're never going to be as capable. I mean, if the Chinese wanted to jump on Taiwan tomorrow, what could we do about it? The answer is not much. They could jump, it'd be over. It could be ugly, but it'd be over. So whether they have new F-16s, or I think now the program is to upgrade the current F-16s, I think the reality is that at some point, I mean, we have this obligation, and it's actually in law, as I understand it, if I remember it, and we should live up to our what we're being asked to do by the Congress. On the other hand, there has to be, I think, a dose of reality in there. It would frustrate business and other businesses. I mean, one of the businesses I'm associated with is Pratt & Whitney. They make engines. They make engines for F-16s. Pratt & Whitney and then they're part of a bigger United Technologies, which makes Otis elevators. About 25% of Otis elevator sales are in China. About 25% of their Otis elevator sales are in China. So if China gets mad at UTC for Pratt & Whitney powering F-16s the United States has given them, are we really giving the Taiwanese a chance to defend themselves with newer aircraft? My estimation is no. It would make a percentage point difference in the outcome in the score. So I think there was a dose of reality there, and it was, it's a complicated relationship. You want to hold to our legal obligations. You want to support a democracy, Taiwan. At the same time, you want to, I think, have to realize there's some practical matters that have to be dealt with. That's my personal opinion. This is not easy. This is not easy. And those that want to bash China say, give them everything. Give them submarines. They can't command and control it. They can't. I mean, they have a lot of issues in their armed forces. And I think they will going forward because of just the resources required to support that kind of stuff. So I think we got to find a way to walk through the middle. I think we found a pretty good way. Reconditioned F-16s are really pretty good machines, and very little difference between those and new ones. So I think they found a pretty good path, actually. Complex subject. I gave you my personal opinion.
Next question.
Sir, my name's Chris Collette. I'm the Army ROTC program here. You spoke earlier about trying to find leverage with Iran. I was wondering what kind of leverage do you think that we don't have and maybe obviously need with Pakistan in order to get them to do what the United States needs them to do? And more specifically, how does China's increasingly close relationship with Pakistan affect our ability to find that?
That's a three-part question. You must be heading to being a reporter in the Army?
Shouldn't be wearing this then.
Huh? Public Affairs Officer. Yeah, you can ask three questions, which I can remember maybe one of them. I think the leverage. I mean, I said I don't think we have much leverage in Iran. The hope in Iran is with 60% of their population 30 or under, and with that population really focused on the United States of America, the West, the U.S., our culture. They like our music, they like our clothes, they like all that, and they're being suppressed. At some point, they're going to say enough of these ayatollahs. At some point, they've been little false starts, but they need a leader that kind of flips Iran like it flipped when they flipped the Shah out. And I don't think we have a lot of leverage in that fight, as I alluded to. I think you got to be careful how you handle it, because if you jump in too early, then the ayatollahs can just say, "See, we told you the U.S. was a great Satan," and they're backing. I mean, so I think there are a lot of unhappy people in Iran, but I think it'll take something like that. And I think we've got to find ways for diplomatic leverage, and it might not be us. The other countries have much better relationships. We don't have representatives there, and so, but the Brits do, and I think the French do. And so others have to kind of help us carry this message and be seized with the same sense of urgency that a nuclear-armed or an Iran capable of a nuclear weapon and the danger of proliferation is a big danger to all of us. And I think it's and we only got a couple of years to fiddle around with this. I don't know what the latest estimate is, but I mean, if it's 3 years, then it's right in front of us. And your second question was on leverage with Pakistan, I think. Pakistan has, I had delightful relations, I think, delightful in the sense that you like to work with them, with their civilians in government and with their military. And the military is the real leverage in the country, and I think what Admiral Mullen did to develop this very close relationship with General Kayani was really important. And then, of course, as he's leaving office, Admiral Mullen said, he kind of gave him some tough love there, which I hope, followed by this visit with the CIA director and the CJCS chairman, General Dempsey, and Secretary Clinton, gives them we can work with them. But, we have broken trust with them before. They've trusted us, and then we've pulled away, and so it's going to take some time to build that trust. But they're in need of friends. They do have the China connection. They like to play the China card. But I think I think they'd be very comfortable. They play the China card for lots of reasons. One is because China's got a 2,200-mile border with India. And they got great infrastructure that leads up to that border, and the Indians have very poor infrastructure leading towards China. So India can be intimidated. Anything that intimidates India makes the Pakistanis go to the dance. They love that. And so we got to help with that piece as well. And I would say our relationship right now is not one of great trust, but that's where the leverage is, to build that relationship up. I think we can help them with the economic instrument of power. Their economy in Pakistan is rock bottom, and we can help them with lots of other things too, corruption and so forth. But they've got to be a willing partner and give up their ties, albeit sometimes loose and indirect, to terrorist groups. That's my theory.
One more question up here. No more back here? Good. Well, in that case...
Can I just say one thing?
Yes,
Thank you all for being here. It's been a privilege to be at Vanderbilt. I've never been on campus before. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's everything I heard it was from not only Admiral Brest, but others. But more importantly, the fact that you're here and we're talking about serious matters to our country. is impressive to me, because informed citizens make the difference as you think about this, as you talk to others about this. And whether what I said is right or wrong is really not the point. If we stimulated some discussion, that's the point, and to give this some really serious thought. And it's great to have the folks here in Naval ROTC and the Army, our future officers, going to a great school that have decided to raise their right hand here in a year or two or three and support and defend our Constitution while the nation's at war is no trivial thing. And I, for one, very much appreciate the fact they've going to devote their lives, or part of their lives, to public service. So thank you.
And I believe that the midshipman group from the NROTC unit would like to make a presentation to you.
Turn around this way so you can get a picture right there with the young lady. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, to me? Oh, I don't. Okay, well,
I believe that's it. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts that I've omitted? Thank you very much for coming.